Why, hello, it is I, Chris Brogan, and welcome to this episode of The Brief. This one's a little different because I didn't actually record this live on the day that I should have. I did this on today's December 1st, but I'm doing one for November 29th because, man, I did all the work and I thought some of the stories are really cool, so I wanted to share them with you anyway. The way this story works is I put out a video that covers all kinds of trends and analysis and ideas that I think may in some way impact your business or your life, or that are in some other way kind of interesting and that you should pay attention to. I do this using the best way to do Facebook Live for Mac, which is called Ecamm Live. Totally check out that app. Totally worth checking out. So today's stories are pretty interesting. As always, you can look at them yourself, chrisbrogan.com/cbm. I'm doing this for the 29th, even though this is December 1st. I'm going to do another one right after this for December 1st, but we might as well go through these links because, man, I took all the time to collect them for you, so I want you to see some of it. Plus, there's some crazy stuff. How did Black Friday turn out for retailers? I'm sitting actually right across from a Target, and it looks empty, but, it's daytime. Amazon took half of online Black Friday sales, so that it turns out that even though all the sales on Black Friday are supposed to be in-person retail and there's something called Cyber Monday, Amazon still took all the bait and really won, and they did a lot of hard work and delivered lots and lots and lots of revenue. So this begs the question, if Black Friday is now switched to online as well because more and more and more people are shopping online, why have a Black Friday sale? Why force people to get in lines to stampede to get a 55-inch TV that no one really wants either? So it seems to be that this was not the best Black Friday in the history of retail sales. Good, because who cares? But on the other side of it, it is interesting because I think with retail trends, there's a lot of stories like that. I've got another story coming up later in the week that will point to that as well. But enough about retail and Black Friday, not that interesting. This one is just kind of ways for you to find some interesting new business for yourself. This is 55 ways to find leads for your freelance business. A lot of these are things that you might have already thought about before, so don't sweat it too hard. As you come along, hey, here's a way to find leads, get referrals. That's a pretty dopey thing on its front. But what I thought about when I looked at it, when I looked at what the request was or the ideas, there are some ideas in there that jog your memory. So first off, there's a great book by John Jantsch called The Referral Engine. Totally worth reading. That is a book that would give you some ideas on how to get better referrals. So that's what I did with this information and insight is I just kind of extrapolated on their 55 ideas and then found something better to do with them. Next story up, this is kind of neat. So, in the land of all the overly hyped social media tools and all this kind of stuff, this is a stripped down blogging tool that exemplifies what they're calling anti-social media. You can check this out yourself. You can just go to txt.fyi. I'm going to show it to you right here. This is the tool. You basically just write. There's no real and obvious business value for this, but who knows? Maybe it makes you happy just to get your words out there. So then you hit publish, boop, and there it is. That's the thing. And it drops a little link so that you can actually point people back to this post. Again, I don't know what human being goes, oh, well, that changes my life. But, it's there and it's an opportunity and you can do it if you want. So there's that. Facebook has some interesting artificial intelligence news that when it came out a couple days ago, people were like, oh, great. And now there's some interesting conversations back and forth. Facebook is going to look at AI to help prevent suicides. So what they're going to do is as people are making their posts on Facebook public and whatnot, they're going to look through them and see if they can find a potential risk factors notification for suicidal risk. Well, there's two questions in that right out of the gate, besides thinking, oh, well, good for Facebook. The one question is, isn't that a sort of invasion of privacy creepy kind of a thing? That's one way to look at it. And another is, how accurate is it going to be? And, is that enough for people to be like, don't worry, artificial intelligence has this one. So either question is kind of tricky, right? So, it's another one of those situations where, can the robot do the job better? I'm not 100% sure. But it is interesting because I was listening to a TED Talk yesterday in which they were talking about the best way to ever think about artificial intelligence is if ever there's a task that's very repetitive, that's what artificial intelligence is built to fix and remove. If there's some part of your job that you hate doing, and most people, there's like 70% of your job that's so boring and awful and usually very repetitive, that part of the job is what artificial intelligence will ultimately be stepping in to take over. So that's not a bad thing. Related, if you're worried about robots taking your job, learn spreadsheets. Now, this is an interesting article in Wired magazine that basically points out that there's all kinds of jobs where robots are going to take over, but there may possibly be a situation in which the fact of operating and kind of analyzing and looking through information on a spreadsheet is still a human-based job. I find that interesting because a lot of times with AI, what they do is the role of AI is to look through a whole bunch of data and find information that isn't immediately apparent if you don't have tons of information. For instance, the machine learning method, the way that the robot beat the human in the game Go, it's mostly Asian game of Go, the way the robot beat it wasn't by learning all the rules of Go. They analyzed 1 million games of Go, and then from that 1 million games decided what ideas or strategies might be the good way forward. It's a different way of computing, and it's coming to a lot more spaces. So I just find that interesting that the spreadsheets doesn't sound like a good, safe place to avoid robots. Well, who knows? Maybe cooking in the kitchen is a great way to avoid having a job, so you could just become a chef or something. Oh, no, it turns out that robots are there too. So there are, and I've actually watched some videos of some of this, there are burger flipping robots and pizza tossing robots and all that. Everything beyond the barista robots now. There's all kinds of machines now that are doing what humans used to do in the food making world. So what's kind of interesting about this is that this all was, very much science fantasy before. And it turns out that it's just around the corner and it's very real. What do you do with that information for your job, though? One of the reasons that I put this project together is because I want to talk about it as it relates to your job. There's not a lot you do to it, except that what you think about is you think, if this, then that. So if the world needs fewer humans in the kitchen, where are those people going to go? If my skill set is this, is that something where a robot might take it over? For instance, a lot of my friends were like, oh, well, I'm a writer. Robots can't beat that. Well, it turns out there are robots who will write 500 or more blog posts a day for like $200 or something like that. That, you could be put out of a job if writing is your only skill. There's a lot of situations where you're going to want to think about, so then what makes it unique for me? What's my version of how I'm going to tackle this space? The other thing is, we tend, when some new technologies come along, we tend to really be slow to want to adopt them, or we think they're a fad or whatever. And a lot of times things can be a fad, but more times than not, things start as seeming like one, but then they actually pan out and become something more. Should we or shouldn't we have relationships with our new robot overlords? Well, turns out that human-robot relations are totally a good thing. And this is an article also in Digital Trends that talks about there are some good benefits to having interactions with robots. Now, it's very interesting. The story talks about, whether or not there's, lovability of robots, what you can feel like, the emotions of robots, the ethics of robots. For instance, in my house with Amazon Alexa, we have rules that you cannot say mean things to the robots. Like you can't say, shut the F up or something like that to your bot. So there's going to be interesting conversations. On the other side, there are robot companions of different levels. For instance, there's this thing I've already reported on a few different times. Why am I blanking on the name of it? Where basically it's a chatbot that you can program to act as if it's your robotic friend or something like that. Hey, John, good to see you live. Thanks for all the stories you've been lobbing my way. I'm still waiting for the John Ackley version of the show myself, but, I'll be patient as impatiently as I am. Now, in another whole trend entirely, how are companies, I just talked about at the beginning of the show about how Amazon took a lot of the Black Friday sales from their online presence, even though the land of brick and mortar exists. How is somebody like Walmart going to compete against that? Well, it's interesting. I had reported a week or two back that Walmart has a whole new model where they're going after the high-end buyer and the low-end buyer. And a lot of people are like, what? I don't go to Walmart for high-end stuff. It turns out it's mostly online. They've bought up all other kinds of brands like Bonobos, ModCloth, shoe something. That's in the article. ModCloth, shoe something or rather, and Bonobos, Moose Jaw, Shoe Buy, and Hay Needle. And in that process, what they're doing is they've decided to let all of those brands kind of stick to their own guns and do their own thing, but it's still Walmart owned, and then there's some synergies being had in the backside of that. So what's something I've written about in my newsletter fairly recently, just go to chrisbrogan.com/NL to sign up for that. One of the things I wrote about my newsletter recently is that we've really got to focus down on one thing kind of tight, get that really, really, really good, and then we can maybe kind of clone and expand. Sam Walton started Walmart based on a truckload of women's nylons. And basically he was doing something in a Ben Franklin store, which is why I called it prank, in a Ben Franklin store, and the management didn't like it, even though it made tons of money. And that was the impetus to start Walmart. It was because he had some ideas that he could bring more value to people and deliver business. And so I would say that it's important to look at these kinds of trends, and more so just to understand how your business can do that same sort of thing. How do you sort of focus on one really deep thing, and then how do you branch out from that so that you have some diversification of trends? I like to report on blockchain stories. This one's kind of interesting. Turns out that blockchain for Canadian cannabis industry. This is interesting because, first off, the cannabis industry is burgeoning. There's billions and billions of dollars being pushed into that space, and I'll show you some stories about that later in the week as well. But with the data analytics and all that, it turns out that one of the ways that blockchain wants to pay attention to be used is to help track the materials from one source to another. With the legal cannabis industry being around, there's a lot of things that now come up where you've got to think about how does this information stay the same? How do we keep our records better? All the time, things that with blockchain exist are to make it so that it's easier for us not to have to rely on just single source data, that kind of a thing. This article is interesting and very directly worth taking a read through. It's a longer article, but it's definitely worth thinking about because it's not what you're thinking about for sure with your website, no matter the size of your business. And that is, how do we design for a browserless web? Now, there's a couple ways to look at this. So the way the article starts off talking about it, they're talking about Google's new Add to Home screen feature makes web-style experiences that are indistinguishable from those of a native app. Meaning, instead of, you're not going to have so much direct app stuff as you're going to just be able to click right to the stuff that you want on your screen itself. So that's kind of interesting. But what goes beyond this is, instead of this sort of web-based type experience and thinking about these sort of app-style experiences, there's another way to look at this too, which is what happens with things like conversational design when we're just talking to the air. What happens with, deviceless web, and when we say deviceless, it's what happens when we're talking into the air to Alexa and other devices as opposed to typing on a keyboard and looking at a screen. When the web and all the other systems that we use online are distributed and sort of spread to other parts, what does that look like? How does context maintain itself, etc.? I'm running into that already when I will set a timer on my phone and then come back up to the house and find out that I didn't hear my phone. I wished I'd had it on Alexa as well. You know what I mean? So there's these things where I am to start a task doesn't actually match where I am to end a task. I'll tell you one example of that. Microsoft Edge browser, which may start to become a much bigger player for people, Microsoft Edge browser has a new thing that says continue on desktop. So someone sends you a link, it's a video, you think that's really cool. You hit pause though because you don't want to waste up your data on your phone. You can hit continue on desktop, and when you go to your Edge browser on your desktop, it's going to say, hey, this is something you said you wanted to watch. Do you want to keep watching it? That's pretty neat, right? So that kind of context is really cool. All right, we have last two stories. Usually it's the last one story, but I couldn't decide between two different cosplay stories. I like to share nerdy stuff at the end. Well, this is a cosplay family. I liked this story. These are called the Junior Ghost Beaters. And these two cute kids come and do cosplay with their parents. Now, I think it's always fun when kids want to do some of the stuff that the parents are into, and sometimes the parents do stuff that the kids are into. In this case, this really geeky dad and the Junior Ghost Beaters and the family come to shows dressed like certain characters like Ash from Evil Dead, and then the kids kind of make mock costumes that kind of go along with it. So that is the example right there of that. I thought that was really fun. I'm going to switch right to another story, which was the idea of budget cosplay. This is kind of tongue-in-cheek all the time, but the idea is that what if you make cosplay, but it's on a budget? Some of these people spend thousands and thousands of dollars on their costume. This is kind of poking a little bit of fun at that. So that's Lilu from The Fifth Element, and that's a man in toilet paper. This is Pinhead from Hellraiser, and this is a man with pins through a nylon. These are always kind of funny to look at because they're creative and inventive in their own way. This is someone doing Duke Nukem. And so on and so on and so on. Usually, again, tongue-in-cheek at their best. So that was the way I wanted to end this one. Like I said, this particular broadcast was for November 29th. I didn't do it live on the day, but I wanted to get it recorded because I had all these good stories I want to share with you. Hopefully this is interesting. If you have questions or ideas or thoughts, you want to share them, send it to chris@chrisbrogan.com. If you want to share stories, you know how to get to me. John Ackley shares me tons of stories. You could do the same thing. And again, thank you so much for being part of this. I'll talk to you soon.